in the offices after some type of meeting in Stamford. And I think Paulie may have got reprimanded or sent home for a period of time, something of that. And I think, they probably yelled at Gerwitz too, but not very loud, or he would probably have fainted. But at the time I hear this and I go, I don't know what this fucking guy looks like, but I would love to have seen Paulie going all Bill Watts on somebody. And it turns out it's this fucking guy. He looks like a frog.
You get so much heat, and in some cases, rightly so, for screaming matches that you've had with people. Paulie, kind of under the radar. How many screaming matches has he had throughout the
good
years?
Lord.
Him and Flair, right?
Yeah, him and Flair, if you believe him from his own chicken lips, him and Vern Gagne, although I don't believe that he said any of the things to Vern Gagne's face that he told a lot of people he said to Vern Gagne. He ran ECW. He may have screamed in different directions or at different, folks or whatever, but I was screaming in Smoky Mountain and he was, I'm sure, doing a lot of screaming. Not when he was trying to get people to do what he wanted them to do. That's when he's smooth. But in panic situations and riots, of which they had more of them than we did. Paulie's a volatile individual also. Bombastic personality, as they say.
And of course, him and Stephanie. That's the famous one.
Him and Stephanie. Him and Hurd a few times. Just that I can think of that I was around. But anyway, so they paint they had painted the picture. The Monday Night Wars were over with. What do they do next? And then now in hindsight, it's even crazier. They tried the Shane-owned WCW. I remember that at the time. I'm like, oh, Jesus Christ. Because they thought, well, this will be great, the McMahon family rivalry. No, it just made it bullshit because nobody believed. They knew that somehow Vince McMahon had won out and bought the company. But then to turn around and make it a work instantly, I still say they could have done something with Bischoff or something to where that the company, that WCW remained some type of entity or at least a renegade part of the corporate structure or whatever. But just all the McMahons own everything and they're fighting amongst themselves just made it too WWF-ish, as well as they didn't bring all the top guys because the Turner Home Entertainment contracts were ridiculous. Well, yeah, the Turner Home contracts will pay you to sit at home. For the people who don't understand, the really top stars of WCW, in order to make WCW look even better than it, I don't know if WCW, how much money they made those couple of years they were really hot, but they didn't make the money back that they lost over the period of the venture. And to make WCW look better in leaner times, in unhappier days, they had made the big money contracts with the top guys, the Nash and Hall $1 million or whatever, and the Sting big contract, and all the Goldberg, all the guys that were getting paid huge money were paid by Turner Home Entertainment instead of WCW itself. It was all coming from the Turner umbrella, but it was on different books. So when WCW was sold to Vince McMahon, tell me, Brian Last, if I'm delaying this information to the folks properly, when WCW was sold to Vince McMahon for a fire sale price, he got the opportunity to absorb all the WCW wrestler contracts, but the guys that had contracts with Turner Home Entertainment, the biggest stars, would still get paid for the next year and a half to just stay fucking home because the Turner Home Entertainment didn't fold.
Yeah, they got paid until their contracts came up, which is why Hogan, Nash, Hall, Sting,
Flair, I think.
Flair, really everyone. I mean, it's really every single top guy.
Except Page and Booker T. Page, I think, asked out of his deal so he could take a WWE deal because he always wanted to be a star and he hadn't had enough of it yet.
And that was a mistake. Point.
Well, but at least he tried. Well, I know, but at least he tried. But anyway, but I've said before, they should have bit the bullet. They should have gone to those guys. They should have said, look, this is going to upset our fucking salary structure. And we want you to know that we're not going to renew for this automatically in a year and a half or 2 years or whatever the fuck, but we'll pay you to the end of this thing because we need to do the invasion angle right, or they shouldn't have done it at all, which is what they didn't do. They didn't do it right, and they shouldn't have done it at all. But they said that they couldn't get the top stars because the contracts were too expensive. It just, they wouldn't spend the money because they didn't want to upset the salary structure in their own company and piss off all their guys, where the new guys in the company we beat are making twice as much or 3 times as much or whatever money as we are. But they should have made allowances for the fact that those guys were integral to the success of the whole thing. That core of guys, 5 or 6 of them at least, didn't have to get every single one. And they should have bit the fucking bullet and done it right. And Bruce Pritchard, who, if Vince has changed, because I heard Vince's words, I even heard Vince's voice, but it was coming out of Bruce's face. Anytime they needed to go to something that was the company explanation for something, there was Bruce to nail exactly what Vince would have said.
He was completely unbearable on this thing, and he's so full of shit. And that's the one thing that everyone should know when you watch this, is that Bruce Pritchard is full of shit, and you really can't believe anything he says because it's this fucking Baghdad Bob line of propaganda. But let me ask you, when it comes to
wait a minute, I was not going to just savage young Mr. Pritchard like you just did.
Did I say anything that wasn't true?
I wasn't going to savage. But here's the thing. Where they got to, well, Bruce said what they got was the WCW green underneath guys is what they got. And what Bruce said, well, the WWF audience just didn't know who these guys were. They did. They knew who they were. They just didn't care because it was the underneath guys and not the guys that they wanted to fucking see in the WWF fighting the WWF's top stars. That was what the problem was from the start. And Bruce has bought the WWE audience that Kevin Dunn used to fucking say, well, our audience doesn't watch any other wrestling. Well, some of them maybe, but the people that fucking make the most effort to watch all the shows and go to the live events, the TVs or whatever, do. But also they glossed over the fact that poor, who was it? Goddamn, Booker and Bagwell were booed out of the building in Tacoma, Washington. Had WCW ever been to Tacoma, fucking Washington?
Maybe, but it certainly wasn't. You know, if it was in the South, it would have been a completely different reaction.
Well, but also Bagwell was in it now too. But still, Booker would have. Booker was over. But if they were going for a WCW, a launch of something to do with WCW, and this was going to be their fucking first stab at it, people wanted to see fucking Ric Flair or Sting or even Hall and Nash come back at that point, or somebody that's identified in a major way with WCW. They didn't want to see a TV match with Booker T and fucking Buff Bagwell. So the people hooted at it in Washington State, and they cut the whole thing off because Vince didn't ever want to. That's why the whole thing failed. Vince didn't ever want to present WCW as comparable or competition to, or equal to. It was always that Southern group, that renegade group, whatever the fuck. So that's kind of where they botched that.
When it comes to the contracts, and obviously those were pretty gigantic contracts, especially for that time, a lot of those top guys had, and I think some of them had a favorite nations clause, so that no matter what someone else got, they, like Kevin Nash, I think, they would get boosted up. But
well, yeah, and you know what? But here's the thing. Nash was probably the guy they needed the least because he's the guy that the WWF audience had already seen the most anyway. They needed Goldberg and Flair and Sting, and then it would have worked because those were guys completely identified with WCW or the NWA that had never been in the other company before.
If the WWE had brought some of those guys in and guys in the locker room had problems with it, would it have been guys like JBL and Bob Holly, or would it have been top guys like Undertaker and Steve Austin? Or would they have realized, you know what, we're going to make more money by bringing these guys in and doing an invasion properly? I mean, who would have had a big problem with it? The mid-card guys in the locker room or the top guys?
The mid-card guys wouldn't have had they already had a problem with what the top guys were making anyway. It doesn't matter if you're top guys, the mid-card guys don't like what you make. certain top guys in the locker room would have known that it was good for business, and wouldn't have. I don't think Austin would have had a problem if it was brought in, and obviously he would have been figured heavily instead of being switched heel, which was another big mistake that they made right at the exactly same time. Some of those top guys would have known, yes, this is going to be big money, but also they would have known if we can get, it was more, Vince didn't want to upset the salary structure. Vince didn't want all of his guys asking for raises next time their contracts were up next time around. If they'd have done mega business for a year off an invasion, then all of the WWF guys that were coming up for renewal would have just been coming out of a fucking record year and wanting more money. So it was more, Vince didn't want to upset his salary structure from his side of the goddamn fence than the heat in the locker room.
He had no competition. They had nothing to negotiate against.
But you got the guys that got over to the level of Steve Austin and The Rock, and those guys always had something to negotiate against, which was going fucking home, which is what Austin eventually did.
Yeah, no, they did. The top guys did. But but whenever you hear these things, it's always like the mid-card guys in the locker room, like, we were in a fight for our lives. No, you weren't. You didn't matter on the totem pole. I mean, with all due respect, the JBLs didn't matter in this whole thing.
But, and that's, and we'll get to that later on also. We talk about the Brawl for All, but the OVW section where they, blitz through Cena, Orton, Batista, etc. They mentioned that, here these guys were trying to train these new generation great athletes, but they're green. And then they flash forward to a year and a half later when the WCW top guys finally come in. And instantly you see Flair in the fucking ring and you go, well, this is what it could have been all along, you dumb shits. Because if they'd had Flair in the fucking ring instead of to wrestle or talk instead of Bagwell and Booker, it would have been a whole different thing.
You know what? Say what you want about Bischoff, but Bischoff was really good on air as a performer for WWE.
Oh, yeah.
Like even bringing him in with that initial crew, even though it was mostly the undercard and midcard guys and, Booker T, Dallas Page, Bagwell, but they got rid of him pretty quickly. Having even Bischoff there would have been a major help. I know he wouldn't have done it at that time. He was probably pretty bitter. He had just tried to buy the company and thought he had it. But it was no one. It was no one who was on top of that TV show that was brought.
But Bischoff is smart enough. If they had got all the top guys, Bischoff would have come too because he'd know this will be the biggest thing ever done. But they didn't, so he didn't. And, they could have made it believable. Bischoff is a great TV performer. What a smarmy ass fucking heel. Like many of us, plays to type. But anyway, so it could have been, but it wasn't. So it didn't materialize. And then they show all the edgy bullshit, and they called it edgy instead of bullshit, but at least acknowledged that it was rotten. All the stupid things they did for a couple years there when they first started getting the TV writers involved. And then Bruce tried to happy talk the brand split. And I thought all the guys here, the guys were not only talking smart, but there's guys talking about being worried about their spots. Stars don't worry about their spots. You think Betty Davis worried about what fucking movie the studio was going to call and tell her that she needed to do once she became a star and could tell Jack Warner to go fuck himself? Stars do not worry about their spots, just like the other day when the announcers said that Rhea Ripley had struggled with self-doubt. Stars don't fucking doubt themselves. So anyway, the guys just, they want the guys talking about like, oh, we were so happy to be, to be chosen. Rocky Goes to Hollywood. That was a group, wasn't it?
Frankie Goes to Hollywood.
Oh, yeah, it was Frankie.
Relax
Rocky
with Frankie.
Yeah. Relax. Don't do it. Rocky Goes to Hollywood. Austin leaves. At least, here's the thing about this whole. And, of course, this is so much inside baseball and exposing the business anyway and how all this is done. I didn't like it from that respect, even though it's a good professional television show to watch with a lot of information, a lot of misinformation. But out of the whole thing, the one thing that made the wrestling business look good was at least it made Steve Austin look like a renegade who wouldn't do what he was told and just said, fuck it. I ain't goddamn throwing the fight. I'm not taking a dive for this fucking guy. Fuck you.